My parents kicked me out because I chose to work in IT. Later, when I advanced in my career, I bought their house and became their landlord. Then I increased their rent by 3 times. It was a typical Friday evening, and as per tradition, James sat down to dine with his parents. The dinner table was adorned with his mother's cherished china, and the air was rich with the aroma of roasted chicken. At the head of the table sat James's father, William, a formidable man known for his piercing blue eyes. Across from James, his mother, Evelyn, often the mediator, took her seat. Despite the serene setting, James felt a growing tension in his stomach that had been building throughout the day. He knew the conversation he needed to initiate, but dreaded the inevitable confrontation. For several months, James wrestled with a significant decision. Initially, he had embarked on a college journey as a pre-law major, intending to emulate his father, a renowned attorney with expectations that James would someday helm the family law firm. However, as his studies progressed, James confronted the truth that his heart lay elsewhere. His true passion resided in the realm of technology. He had spent countless hours during high school engrossed in coding and exploring the intricacies of computers. A few weeks prior, he had come to the firm decision that he could no longer pursue a path in law. It was time to switch his major to computer science. Amidst the passing of mashed potatoes and casual dinner chatter, he cleared his throat, catching his mother's unsuspecting smile. "Mom, Dad, there's something important I need to discuss," James began, his voice carrying a tremor of nervousness. At this, his father looked up sharply, his gaze narrowed. "What is it, son?" William inquired. Taking a deep breath for courage, James replied, "I've been reevaluating my major and I've decided to switch to computer science. I understand it's a major shift, but I've given it a lot of thought and truly believe this is where my passion and future lie." The room fell silent, but for the soft clinking of cutlery, James watched as his mother's expression shifted from calm to concern, while his father's face flushed with anger. "Computer science?" William exploded, slamming his fork down. "Are you out of your mind, James? We've invested thousands into your education for you to follow in my footsteps, and now you want to throw it all away to tinker with computers?" In this moment, James's choice not only challenged familial expectations, but also highlighted the evolving dynamics within many modern families where traditional career paths are often reconsidered in favor of passion-driven pursuits in technology and innovation. Evelyn attempted to intervene, her voice quivering with concern. "William, maybe we should listen to what he has to say." But William dismissed her with a sharp retort. "No, Evelyn, this is nonsense." He turned his stern gaze back to James. "Do you even understand what you're proposing? Law is your future. Computer science is a mere hobby, not a viable career path. This is absurd." James's hands trembled as he gripped them tightly in his lap, trying to muster the courage to defend his decision. "Dad, it's not just a hobby for me. I've given this a lot of thought. I know what I want from my life," he asserted. His father scoffed dismissively. "You don't know anything. You're too young to make such decisions. Do you realize how much you're risking? You'll be throwing away all the opportunities I've worked so hard to arrange for you," William continued, his voice rising in frustration. Evelyn's eyes filled with worry, and she looked anxiously between her son and her husband, remaining silent. James's voice grew stronger, more determined. "I'm not asking for your permission," he declared. "I've already initiated the process. I'm switching my major." The declaration seemed to ignite a fury in William. "If you abandon law, you're abandoning this family's legacy," William thundered. "You won't receive a cent from us, not for tuition, not for living expenses. You're on your own. If you think you're mature enough to make your own decisions, then you should be mature enough to support yourself. You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave." Evelyn gasped, tears forming in her eyes. "William, you can't do this." "I can, and I will," he responded sternly. "James, if you won't abide by our rules, you can't stay under our roof. This conversation is over." Crushed and bewildered by the harshness of his father's ultimatum, James felt his world crumbling. Evelyn reached out, trying to offer a comforting touch, but he recoiled, pulling his hand away. The dining room felt increasingly claustrophobic, the tension almost palpable. Without uttering another word, James stood and left the table, his steps heavy with despair. He could hear his mother's plaintive calls as he walked away, her voice breaking with sorrow, but he didn't look back. Entering his room, he shut the door with a forceful slam and sat on his bed, staring blankly at the wall, enveloped in a profound sense of isolation. The searing anger in James's chest felt as if it were etching a permanent scar, but beneath that anger lay a profound fear of the unknown that awaited him. Having never lived independently, the sudden necessity to do so within 24 hours left him feeling adrift in a sea of uncertainty. As he began stuffing his belongings into a duffel bag, his phone vibrated sharply. It was a message from his best friend Noah inquiring about their weekend plans. James gazed at the screen, the magnitude of his situation weighing heavily upon him. Noah was oblivious to the storm that had just erupted in James's life, and James found himself unprepared to unravel the evening's events via text. Just then, a gentle knock at his door broke his train of thought. It was his mother. "James, please," she whispered with a shaky voice. "Let me in." With reluctance, he opened the door. Evelyn entered, her eyes swollen and red from crying. Sitting on the edge of his bed, she murmured, "I'm so sorry, James. Your father, he can be so inflexible, but he doesn't truly mean those harsh words. He's just disappointed." James looked at her with a growing bitterness. "Disappointed? He just told me to leave. How am I supposed to just accept that?" Evelyn reached out, her hand gently resting on his arm. "James, you don't have to leave. I'll speak with him. Maybe tomorrow, once things have settled, we can all discuss this calmly. You know how he gets worried about your future?" But James shook his head, his determination stealing. "No, Mom." He made his stance very clear. "I need to do this on my own." Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks as she grasped his hand. "I don't want to lose you." "You're not losing me," James reassured softly, though his heart was heavy. "But I can't stay here, not under these circumstances." Evelyn nodded, a sense of defeat washing over her. "Just promise me you'll be safe. Call me if you need anything at all." "I will," James responded, though doubt shadowed his conviction. As Evelyn exited the room, a profound emptiness engulfed him. The familiar contours of his life were dissolving, and he felt powerless to stop the changes that morning would bring. By dawn, James had packed the last of his essentials, ready to face a new chapter alone. William had remained silent since the explosive argument, while Evelyn attempted to maintain a semblance of normalcy, her heartbreak palpable. James stood at the threshold, his bags packed, not sure of his destination, but certain he could not stay. He paused at the front door, taking one last lingering look at the home of his childhood. Flashes of family dinners, festive holidays, and carefree childhood moments swept through his mind, yet they seemed like relics of another's life now. With a heavy heart, he stepped through the doorway and closed it behind him, severing the physical connection to his past. Outside, James clutched his duffel bag, its contents modest. Some clothes, his laptop, and a small stash of cash from various summer jobs. The gravity of his new reality settling in, he dialed the only person he could think of. "Hey, Noah, can I crash at your place for a bit?" Without hesitation, Noah's voice came through, laid back and reassuring. "Sure, man. Come over. We'll figure it out." Noah's apartment, nestled in the bustling downtown area, was a cramped sanctuary cluttered with personal effects. Space was at a premium, barely accommodating Noah's possessions, let alone an additional occupant. Yet, it offered a refuge far better than the alternative. When James arrived, Noah greeted him warmly, helping him with his bags and apologizing for the mess, shoving aside pizza boxes to clear the couch. "You can crash on the couch or the floor, whatever you prefer," Noah offered. Exhausted, James sank into the couch, grateful for the offer. "Couch is fine, thanks, man. I owe you one, though," he muttered. "No worries," Noah replied, tossing a beer to James from the fridge. "You'll sort this out." However, as days stretched into weeks, the simplicity of Noah's assurance faded. The cramped quarters of the apartment offered little privacy, and James soon felt like an unwelcome burden. Struggling to keep up with his studies, he spent his mornings in the library, attempting to concentrate, but his thoughts constantly wandered back to the unresolved tensions and his uncertain future. Navigating his new reality, James grappled with the daunting questions of how he could afford rent and manage his coursework while sleeping on a friend's couch. Desperate for income, he found a job waiting tables at a local diner during the evening hours. The wages were meager and the shifts long, leaving him drained by the time he returned to Noah's apartment each night. This exhaustion took a toll, and soon, James's academic performance began to suffer. One exhausting evening after a demanding shift, James returned to find Noah lounging among a sea of empty beer cans. "Rough night, but fun," Noah commented lazily, barely acknowledging James's weary presence. "Yeah, something like that," James responded dryly, tossing his apron onto a chair before collapsing onto the floor, his body and mind weighed down by fatigue. Noah, noticing James's plight, expressed his concern. "You can't keep doing this, man. It's killing you." James was painfully aware of his dire situation. With his savings depleted and the bridge to his parents burned, the option to ask for financial help was unthinkable. He felt utterly alone, cornered into a life he hadn't envisioned. His academic struggles didn't go unnoticed for long. Professors remarked on his frequent absences, and the mounting backlog of assignments became overwhelming. Eventually, reality forced his hand, and James made the heart-wrenching decision to drop out of college. The impact of his decision was profound. James watched as his aspirations, his future, and all his dreams seemed to unravel before him. Without the structure of college, he was adrift, unsure of his next steps. Noah, ever supportive, tried to lift his spirits one evening. "You can't just sit here, man. Dropping out isn't the end of the world. Plenty of people succeed without a degree." James knew Noah meant well, but his words provided little solace. "Yeah, but what now? Programming is all I know." "Then stick with that," Noah urged him, pragmatic yet supportive. "But remember, you've still got bills to pay." James felt the weight of his friend's advice. While programming was a viable path, it wasn't immediately lucrative without a clear plan or opportunities. The reality of his financial obligations loomed large, adding another layer of urgency to find a way forward. Grasping at any semblance of stability, James considered Noah's suggestion to find a night job, allowing him to dedicate daylight hours to his passion for coding. Noah mentioned a friend, Mark, who worked security downtown, and mentioned they were hiring. It was far from glamorous, but it was a start. James reached out to Mark and secured the security job almost instantly. The role was primarily passive, involving sitting in a dimly lit lobby overnight, monitoring screens, and periodically patrolling the corridors. The compensation was an improvement over the diner, and the nocturnal hours freed up his days for coding. However, the solitude of the job was palpable, and during the quiet hours, James's thoughts often wandered back to the losses that had led him to this point. The hardest part was managing his sleep schedule. Working nights sliced his days into disjointed segments. He'd snatch a few hours of sleep after his shift, then groggily transition to coding. Initially, James focused on small-scale projects such as creating websites for local businesses and crafting simple automation scripts. His proficiency with coding began to flourish, yet so did his fatigue. Then, one night, as he sat monitoring the security feeds, his phone vibrated with an unexpected email. A startup had stumbled upon one of his projects online and expressed interest in discussing it further. Elated, James read the email repeatedly, daring to hope this was the opportunity he needed. He arranged a call for the following day, spending the rest of his shift distracted, pacing the halls, overwhelmed by potential scenarios. Yet, the conversation didn't go as he had anticipated. While the company appreciated his work, they weren't prepared to offer him a position. They wanted someone with more experience, more completed projects, more of everything. Disheartened, James ended the call, the sting of rejection heavy in his chest. He sat before his computer screen, lost in thought, questioning his future. Was he destined to remain a security guard, coding in the fleeting spare moments, clinging to the hope of a breakthrough that might never arrive? Time blurred as he delved deeper into his security work, taking on additional shifts to scrape by financially, his interactions with Noah dwindling. The small apartment felt increasingly like a cell, solitude eating away at him each night at his desk. His programming became his sole refuge, the only aspect of his life that still held clarity and purpose. Then, one rainy night as his shift neared its end, an unexpected interruption occurred. A man burst into the lobby, soaked from the storm outside. The man's desperate gaze met James's as he approached the desk, his voice trembling with urgency. "Hey man, I need your help," stammered, casting wary glances over his shoulder. "Someone's after me." Confused, James asked, "Who's after you?" The man leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not supposed to say this, but I know things. They're trying to silence me. You gotta help me." Unsure of how to handle the situation, James motioned for the man to sit down. "Okay, just calm down. Let's figure this out." Before they could delve deeper, two men in sharp suits entered the lobby. Their eyes swept the room, quickly focusing on the distressed man tucked in the corner. As they advanced, James's heart rate spiked. The first man spoke with a commanding tone. "We're looking for someone. Have you seen anyone come through here?" James hesitated, his instincts screaming to protect the frightened man. With a measured calm he didn't feel, James replied, No one's come through here." The suited men scrutinized him briefly before exiting the building. Once they were gone, the man in the corner rose, his expression one of profound relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice laden with gratitude. "You just saved my life." With that, he slipped away into the dark night, leaving James alone with a whirlwind of thoughts. The next day, James attempted to dismiss the incident, but the encounter had sown seeds of unease. In the ensuing weeks, his sense of security eroded. He noticed strangers lingering near him, received odd phone calls at odd hours, and found emails mysteriously disappearing from his inbox. The paranoia seemed to chase him, but he pushed these thoughts aside. His priority was to maintain focus on his work and coding project. Amidst this unsettling period, James continued to cultivate his programming skills. He began to carve out a small niche for himself online, accepting freelance programming gigs wherever they appeared. It wasn't a fortune, but it provided enough to keep him afloat and slowly rebuild his confidence. Gradually, James felt his life regaining some semblance of normalcy, even as the eerie memory of that night lingered in the recesses of his mind, an unresolved shadow that occasionally prickled his consciousness. Then, one seemingly mundane day, as he was knee-deep in the daily grind at the cafe, juggling coffee orders and cleaning tables, life threw another curveball, altering his course once more. Working in the cafe was far from the glamour and excitement James once envisioned for his career. The repetitive nature of the job, coupled with the ceaseless demands of customers, left him little time to nurture his coding aspirations. He tried to make the most of his breaks, opening his laptop to chip away at his projects, but exhaustion often won over, fogging his focus. One drizzly afternoon, while James was cleaning the tables near the cafe's large window, he noticed a man who had been sitting quietly in the corner for several hours. The man, dressed in a suit, appeared absorbed in his tablet, only occasionally looking up. Initially, James paid him little mind, until the man approached the counter while James was tinkering with the register. The man, with his tall frame, gray hair, and an aura of serene assurance, leaned against the counter. "You a coder?" he inquired in a smooth, conversational tone. Surprised, James responded hesitantly, yeah, sort of. I do some programming when I can, but it's nothing serious right now," James added, unsure of the man's intention. The man's face broke into a thoughtful smile. "I noticed you working earlier. You seem more than just a barista," he observed. James laughed nervously, his hands finding refuge at the back of his neck. "Well, I'd like to think so, but finding real opportunities has been tough. I dropped out of college and I'm just working here to get by." The man nodded, understanding. "What kind of programming do you do?" "Mostly web development and some back-end stuff," James replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious about his makeshift portfolio. "I do a bit of freelance, but nothing major." Interest piqued, the man's eyebrow arched slightly. "I work at an IT company and we're currently looking for fresh talent. We have some entry-level positions. If you're interested, I could set up an interview for you." James's heart skipped. The prospect seemed too good to be true. "You're serious?" he managed to ask, striving to mask his burgeoning excitement. The man's smile widened as he slid a business card across the counter. "Come by the office tomorrow morning and we'll see what you've got." James watched as the man, now known to him as David Monroe, Director of Development at Crestline Technologies, walked out into the rainy afternoon. Holding the business card, James felt a glimmer of hope. Crestline was a well-known name in the industry, renowned for its innovative software solution. Could this unexpected encounter change the trajectory of his life? As James tucked the business card into his pocket, his pulse quickened with the tantalizing possibility that this could be the turning point he had longed for. The following morning, he meticulously chose the best outfit he could muster: a slightly oversized blazer and scuffed shoes worn from his days at the cafe. Despite the imperfections, he made every effort to present himself well. Upon his arrival at Crestline Technologies, he was ushered by a friendly receptionist into a sleek, modern conference room. Shortly after, David Monroe entered with the same composed confidence James remembered from the cafe. The interview commenced, and James found himself navigating a gauntlet of inquiries about his programming experience, his approach to problem solving, and his past projects. James responded candidly, weaving in stories of his freelance work, his self-taught journey, and the personal projects that fueled his passion for coding. He didn't shy away from discussing the obstacles he'd faced, including his departure from college and the various odd jobs that sustained him. Yet, he emphasized his unwavering dedication to programming. David seemed to appreciate his transparency, remarking, "We're not looking for someone with a flawless background, we're looking for someone with determination. You've got that." A flicker of hope ignited within James as David leaned forward, extending a contract. "Welcome to Crestline, James. It's an entry-level position, but you'll have ample opportunity to advance." Overwhelmed with joy, James signed the contract, his mind buzzing with the realization that he was now officially part of the IT world. As he exited the building, his heart was alight with optimism, feeling that his life was aligning at last. Determined to prove his worth, James immersed himself in his new role with zeal. Despite being surrounded by colleagues who boasted degrees from prestigious institutions, he was not deterred. He embraced the steep learning curve, spending extra hours at the office to refine his coding skills, familiarize himself with new technologies, and tackle the complexities of his assignments. David recognized his potential and entrusted him with challenging projects early on. One such project involved developing a significant feature for one of Crestline's leading software products, a task that came with stringent deadlines and high stakes. James dedicated himself fully, often forgoing meals and sleep to perfect his work, driven by a commitment to not just meet but exceed expectations. The successful launch of the feature marked a pivotal moment in James's career at Crestline Technologies. Over the months that followed, his reputation within the company soared. Known for his innovative problem-solving abilities and his knack for thinking outside the box, James quickly became a go-to resource for his colleagues, earning the respect of even the most seasoned developers. He had transcended his initial image as the college dropout to become an indispensable asset to the team. Despite his professional ascent, James remained true to his root. Coding was more than a job, it was his lifeblood. He continued to engage in side projects and explore new technologies in his free time, constantly seeking ways to refine his skills. Nearly 2 years into his tenure at Crestline, James was summoned to David's office. With a hint of pride, David commended him. "James, I've been watching your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've come a long way since that day at the cafe." James, humbled and a bit amazed by his own journey, responded, "Thanks, David. Your support has been instrumental." David, dismissing the accolades with a wave, shifted the conversation. "You did the work, James, but now it's time for the next step." Intrigued, James leaned in. "What do you mean?" David laid out his vision. "We're developing a cutting-edge platform, and I want you to lead the development team." The offer stunned James, but it was a challenge he was ready to embrace. Accepting without hesitation, he soon found himself in a leadership role, coordinating a team, liaising with various departments, and steering the development of a platform critical to the company's future. James thrived under the pressure, leading the project to resounding success and elevating his status within the tech community. No longer just a junior coder, he became a prominent figure at Crestline, attracting attention from competitors eager to lure him away. However, James had broader aspirations. After 3 enriching years at Crestline, he decided it was time to pursue his own entrepreneurial dreams. With a substantial savings, invaluable experience, and a robust network, James felt prepared to venture out on his own. He left Crestline with David's blessing and gratitude, embarking on the thrilling journey of building his own startup. Starting his own company proved to be a Herculean task, testing every ounce of James's resilience. The early days were fraught with challenges, from the anxiety of potentially missing payroll to the relentless barrage of setbacks. Yet, James was no stranger to adversity, and his determination to succeed kept him anchored through turbulent times. His startup specialized in creating innovative software solutions tailored for small businesses, a sector James felt deeply connected to. He assembled a small but talented team, including a few former colleagues from Crestline, and together they crafted a product that quickly resonated with their target market. As the company's product gained traction, James's reputation as a forward-thinking leader in the tech industry solidified. This recognition caught the attention of investors, and before long, his startup secured a significant round of funding. This financial infusion allowed them to scale operations dramatically, catapulting the company into the spotlight as one of the most buzzworthy startups in the tech scene. Reflecting on his journey from a college dropout working night shifts as a security guard to becoming the founder and CEO of a thriving tech enterprise, James was awestruck by his own transformation. The path hadn't been easy. Every obstacle and sleepless night had paved the way to his current standing, overlooking the city's skyline from his office. He often reminisced about the rainy day at the cafe when a chance encounter drastically altered the course of his life. James's story was one of profound change, not only marked by financial success, but also by the deep sense of autonomy and empowerment he had achieved. However, beneath the surface of these accomplishments, a part of him remained troubled. Despite years of striving to put the past behind him, the memory of how his parents had cast him aside lingered painfully. He had endeavored to move forward, immersing himself in his work and the joys of creation, yet the unresolved feelings of abandonment and anger persisted like an unhealed wound, a constant reminder of his initial struggles and the familial bonds that had been so abruptly severed. Years had passed without a word between James and his parents. There was no reconciliation, no recognition of his accomplishments. In their eyes, he remained the rebellious son who had abandoned the future they had meticulously planned for him. One evening, after another demanding day at the office, James found himself in his modern apartment, idly browsing real estate listings, a hobby that allowed him to scout for potential investments. He wasn't expecting anything more than a casual glance. However, a listing suddenly captured his attention. It was his parents' house, the very home where he had grown up and which had been his sanctuary until the night he was forced to leave. Seeing it presented as just another property on the market was jarring. Memories of happier times came flooding back. Family dinners, Christmas mornings, and the harrowing night that had changed everything. Curiosity quickly morphed into a deeper intrigue as James delved into the details of the listing. It became apparent that his parents were facing financial difficulties, his father had retired, and his once thriving law practice had been faltering for years. Now, it seemed they were compelled to sell the family home to stay afloat. A bold idea struck James. He could buy the house, not merely as an investment, but as a form of retribution. The notion brought a peculiar surge of excitement. After enduring the pain and rejection from his family, purchasing the house would symbolize a twisted form of victory. They had expelled him from their home in his time of need, and now he had the opportunity to claim ownership of it. The more James entertained the idea, the more enticing it became. He decided he wouldn't inform them of his actions. Instead, he would let them continue living there, oblivious to the fact that he was now their landlord. When the moment was right, he would unveil the truth. This revelation would serve as a stark demonstration of how much he had achieved on his own and how little he needed their approval or support. It was a chance to settle the past on his terms, in the most unexpected way possible. James acted swiftly, contacting the real estate agent to finalize the purchase of his childhood home. Within a week, the transaction was complete. He was now the owner of the property where he had endured much turmoil, yet his parents remained unaware of the change in ownership. Owning this house, once a symbol of his strife, now felt oddly empowering as it became another asset in his burgeoning portfolio. He chose not to reveal his acquisition immediately, giving himself time to absorb the magnitude of his actions. As the reality settled, a plan began to take shape in his mind. Eventually, he felt prepared to face his past directly. The day to confront his parents finally arrived. Despite the years of silence and distance, he was well informed about their circumstances. His father had retired and his mother was working part-time. They still resided in the house, unwittingly renting it from him as they contemplated their uncertain future. James drove to the house, parking his black car a short distance away to approach unnoticed. As he walked up to the familiar front door, adrenaline surged through him. The house looked unchanged, frozen in time, evoking a mix of nostalgia and determination. He rang the doorbell. After a moment, his mother answered. Time had altered her appearance. She seemed older, wearier. Her eyes widened in shock, barely whispering his name as if questioning the reality of his presence. "What are you doing here?" she managed to ask, her voice filled with a mixture of surprise and caution. Before he could respond, his father appeared, his expression turning stern at the sight of James. "You've got some nerve coming here," his father declared defensively, positioning himself protectively in front of his wife. James remained calm, his voice even. "We need to talk," he stated plainly. "There's nothing to talk about," his father retorted sharply, his stance unwavering. However, James's composed demeanor and the gravity of his visit seemed to shift the atmosphere. "I think you'll want to hear this," he continued, his voice steady and confident. After a tense pause, his father's resolve faltered slightly, and he stepped aside, allowing James to enter. Walking back into the house, the familiar sense of old furniture and his mother's perfume enveloped him, transporting him back in time. It felt surreal, like stepping into a past life, yet here he was, ready to redefine the narrative of his relationship with his parent. James acted swiftly, contacting the real estate agent to finalize the purchase of his childhood home. Within a week, the transaction was complete. He was now the owner of the property where he had endured much turmoil, yet his parents remained unaware of the change in ownership. Owning this house, once a symbol of his strife, now felt oddly empowering as it became another asset in his burgeoning portfolio. He chose not to reveal his acquisition immediately, giving himself time to absorb the magnitude of his actions. As the reality settled, a plan began to take shape in his mind. Eventually, he felt prepared to face his past directly. The day to confront his parents finally arrived. Despite the years of silence and distance, he was well informed about their circumstances. His father had retired, and his mother was working part-time. They still resided in the house, unwittingly renting it from him as they contemplated their uncertain future. James drove to the house, parking his black car a short distance away to approach unnoticed. As he walked up to the familiar front door, adrenaline surged through him. The house looked unchanged, frozen in time, evoking a mix of nostalgia and determination. He rang the doorbell. After a moment, his mother, time had altered her appearance. She seemed older, wearier. Her eyes widened in shock, barely whispering his name as if questioning the reality of his presence. "What are you doing here?" she managed to, voice filled with a mixture of surprise and caution. Before he could respond, his father appeared, his expression turning stern at the sight of James. "You've got some nerve coming here," his father declared defensively, positioning himself protectively in front of his wife. James remained calm, his voice, "We need to talk," he stated plainly. "There's nothing to talk about," his father retorted sharply, his stance unwavering. However, James's composed demeanor and the gravity of his visit seemed to shift the atmosphere. "I think you'll want to hear this," he continued, his voice steady and confident. After a tense pause, his father's resolve faltered slightly, and he stepped aside, allowing James to enter. Walking back into the house, the familiar sense of old furniture and his mother's perfume enveloped him, transporting him back in time. It felt surreal, like stepping into a past life, yet here he was, ready to redefine the narrative of his relationship with his parent. As James was led into the living room by his parents, the air was thick with tension. His father's voice carried a mix of anger and suspicion as he crossed his arms defensively. "So what is this about? You come here to gloat, to rub your success in our face?" James shook his head, settling back into his chair with a calm demeanor. "No, I came here to tell you something important," he began, pausing briefly to ensure he had their full attention. "I own this house now." The room fell into a stunned silence. His mother's face drained of color, her hand covering her mouth in shock while disbelief and then anger flickered across his father. "What the hell are you talking about?" his father finally, low and threatened. "I bought the house," James continued, his voice unyielding. "It was up for sale, so I bought it, which means technically I'm your landlord now." His mother seemed on the verge of fainting. "Why would you do that, James?" she whispered, her voice trembling. James met their gazes squarely. "Because I could. Because you threw me out. You made me feel like I didn't matter. Now you're the ones who don't matter." His father's hands balled into fists at his sides. "What do you want?" he demanded, voice rough with contained rage. "You didn't come here just to tell us that. What's your plan?" James's response was chilling, a cold smile playing on his lip. "I want to triple your rent." The impact of his words was immediate and devastating. His mother gasped, tears springing to her eyes, while his father's complexion turned a furious red. "You can't do that," he exclaimed, the frustration evident. "We can't afford that." James's reply was dismissive. "Not my problem. You'll either pay or move out. You gave me 24 hours to leave once. Consider this payback." His mother stood, her face marred by tears. "James, please, we're your parents. We raised you. We didn't mean for it to turn out like this." Flicker of guilt, or perhaps regret, pulled at James, but he steeled himself against it. They deserved this, didn't they? They had abandoned him when he needed them the most. Now it was their turn to experience what helplessness felt like. Yet, as he observed his mother's tear-streaked face and his father's defeated posture, the expected feeling of triumph failed to materialize. Instead, a hollow emptiness began to settle in, leaving him to question the true satisfaction of his revenge. Standing up and leaving his parents' house without another word, James departed into the chilling silence that followed. In the days after the confrontation, he anticipated the surge of satisfaction or a feeling of finality, but neither came. His life progressed, meetings filled his schedule, his company continued to expand, and his business ventures flourished. Yet, a persistent emptiness shadowed his accomplishments. James had envisioned this moment of revenge for years, imagining it as a turning point that would finally balance the scales for past wrongs. He had acquired their house and dramatically increased their rent, actions that should have delivered a sense of justice. However, the anticipated gratification from these acts was absent. Instead, he felt more hollow than victorious. One late night, as he sat in his office overlooking the city skyline, James found himself reflecting on his relationship with his parents. Despite his financial success and the power it brought, none of it had mended the deep-seated wounds of his past. The actions he thought would bring closure had only perpetuated the pain and bitterness. Sitting alone, surrounded by the quiet of his office, James confronted a hard truth. No amount of money or revenge could repair the damaged bonds between him and his parents. Owning their house hadn't eased the hurt. If anything, it had only solidified the rift. The realization dawned on him that revenge was not the remedy he needed. What James truly needed was to find peace within himself, to release the bitterness and cease allowing the past to define his present and future. As he gazed out at the twinkling city lights, a profound understanding settled within him. The path to moving forward wasn't through retribution, but through forgiveness, not only towards his parents, but also towards himself. It was time to let go and begin the process of healing from within, embracing forgiveness as the step towards genuine closure.